We usually only walk in one direction. It's the most basic thing we do, isn't it? One foot in front of the other, always moving towards something, always chasing the horizon that keeps moving away. Evolution spent millions of years designing us to look ahead, putting our eyes in the front of our heads and our feet pointing toward the future. We are built for the forward push, the progress, the next step in a long line of steps that never really seems to have an end point. But lately, I've been seeing something strange in my neighborhood, a quiet, slow-motion glitch in the usual flow of the morning commute. It started with an old man I see every day, someone who usually just plods along with a cane, looking at the cracks in the gray pavement. Last Tuesday, he wasn't looking at the cracks. He was moving in reverse, stepping carefully into the space he had just occupied a second before. He looked like a film reel being wound back by an invisible hand, a solitary figure defying the collective forward momentum of the entire street. I watched him from my window, wondering if he had finally lost his way or if he was searching for something he'd dropped in the tall grass. But he looked so focused, so incredibly intentional with every single movement of his heels and his heavy, sensible walking shoes. It turns out there's a whole world of research behind this weird little trend, a claim that walking backward can actually regrow your brain. They call it retrowalking, and the scientists say it forces the mind to build new neural pathways just to handle the sheer confusion of the motion. When you move backward, your brain can't rely on its old, dusty maps anymore. It has to wake up and start paying attention to the world again. It's like rewriting a story from the last page to the first, or trying to hum a familiar tune while jumping over a series of invisible hurdles. The theory is that this physical friction creates a spark of neuroplasticity, a chance for the brain to sprout new connections where things had grown still. We all want to keep the lights on for as long as possible, don't we? We're terrified of the fading, of the moments when our own names start to feel like ghosts. So we reach for these odd, uncomfortable practices, hoping that a bit of physical awkwardness can save us from the inevitable softening of the mind. I decided to try it myself yesterday afternoon, waiting until the street was mostly empty so I wouldn't have to explain my new hobby to the neighbors. I took my first step back, and I felt a sudden, sharp surge of pure, unadulterated vulnerability that I wasn't at all prepared for. It is a very strange thing to realize how much you rely on your eyes to tell you that the ground is still there and that it is still solid. Without the horizon in front of you, the world becomes a series of guesses and small, nervous prayers whispered to the soles of your own feet. My ankles felt weak and uncertain, protesting the strange new demands I was making on their muscles and their ancient, reliable memory. I felt like a child again, or maybe like an animal that hasn't quite figured out how its own limbs are supposed to work in the gravity of the earth. It's hard to trust the ground you haven't seen yet. I found myself constantly wanting to peek over my shoulder, to steal a glance at the path behind me just to make sure I wasn't about to fall into a hole. But the rules say you have to trust the process, to let your other senses take over the job that your eyes have been hogging for your entire life. You start to hear the world differently, the crunch of the gravel, the rustle of the leaves, the distant hum of a car that sounds much closer than it is. The silence between your footsteps becomes a space where your brain has to work 3 times as hard to make sense of the empty air. I noticed you're listening quite carefully now, perhaps wondering if you should go outside and try to move in reverse for a little while tonight. It's a tempting thought, isn't it? The idea that you could just walk your way back to a sharper, clearer version of the person you used to be. But then I saw a neighbor watching me from his porch, his face a mask of polite confusion and maybe just a little bit of genuine concern for my sanity. The social weight of looking ridiculous is much heavier than the physical weight of walking 5 miles in the heat of a summer afternoon. We're so afraid of being the weird one in the village that we often choose the comfort of a fading mind over the embarrassment of a new habit. I felt a flash of shame and almost turned round, almost went back to the safe, predictable forward motion that everyone else expects of me. Why do we care so much about the gaze of a stranger who doesn't even know our middle names or the things that keep us awake at 3 in the morning? I kept going anyway, my heels hitting the pavement with a rhythmic, clumsy thud that sounded like a very slow and very broken drum beat. The doubt started to settle in around the second lap of the park, a cold little voice asking if I was actually doing anything useful at all. Is my hippocampus really growing? Or am I just training myself to be a person who is very good at tripping over their own shoelaces in public? We trust the studies because they give us a sense of control over the one thing we can't actually control: the passage of time and the decay of ourselves. We want a technique for everything, a manual for the soul that tells us exactly which way to walk to avoid the darkness at the end of the road. But the research doesn't tell you how lonely it feels to move in the opposite direction of everyone else in your life for an hour. It doesn't tell you about the vertigo that hits when you finally stop and realize you've been looking at the same tree for 5 minutes without knowing it. Maybe the brain growth isn't in the movement itself, but in the willingness to be lost in a place that you thought you knew by heart. The elderly men in the village aren't scientists. They're just people who are tired of looking at the same horizon every single morning of their lives. They want to see the world from a different angle before they have to leave it behind for good, and reverse walking is a way to cheat the view. It's a quiet rebellion against the straight line, a way to say no to the momentum that is trying to push them toward the inevitable finish line. I noticed a small patch of wildflowers near the storm drain that I've walked past 1,000 times and never once actually seen until yesterday. Because I was moving backward, they were the last thing I saw before I rounded the corner, and they looked incredibly bright. You see the after before the before, a chronological reversal that makes the ordinary world look like a dream you're trying to remember. It's a bit like watching a movie in Rewind. The glass unbreaks, the fire turns back into wood, and the tears move back into the eyes where they started. There's a comfort in the idea of undoing, even if it is just a physical illusion created by the way you've decided to move your legs. But the contradiction is always there, waiting in the shadows of the next step you take into the dark space behind your head. If I'm walking backward to move forward in my health, am I still just chasing a result that I'll never actually be able to catch or hold? We optimize our bodies so we can live longer, but what are we living for if all our time is spent on the how rather than the why of it all? I stopped near the old man's house and saw him sitting on his bench, breathing hard and looking at his hands with a strange, distant smile. He didn't look like a genius with a regrown brain. He just looked like a man who had survived another day of being himself in a loud world. I wonder if he remembers the first time he walked forward, or if the backward steps are starting to feel more like home than the front ones ever did. My calves were burning with a dull, persistent heat that felt like a warning from a part of my body that I've been ignoring for way too long. The mind was messy, filled with a static noise that wasn't particularly zen or particularly enlightened, despite what the articles promised. I wasn't calm. I was just tired of trying to not fall over while the world continued to spin in its usual, indifferent, and very fast direction. The village looks a bit more fragile now, like a set of cardboard houses that could be knocked over by a single, determined, and backward-moving person. It's a strange perspective to carry into the evening, a feeling that the ground is a bit less solid and the path is a bit more elective than it was at noon. I'm not sure I'll do it again tomorrow, or if I'll just go back to the safe, forward-facing walk that keeps my neighbors from calling the doctor. But I think I might look back more often, just to see the wildflowers near the drain before they vanish round the corner of my own limited sight. We usually only walk in one direction, but the world is round, so maybe it doesn't really matter which way we think we're going in the end. The horizon is still there, waiting for us to catch up to it, regardless of whether we're looking at it or if we're just feeling it at our backs. I think I'll just stand still for a minute now and let the world move around me for a change, without any effort or any research to justify it. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.